Hello everyone, this is Lala and today I'm going to be talking about race in Big Brother. I already did part 1 when it comes to Hispanics and today I'm going to talk about Asian people in Big Brother and I'm going to make some categories and distinctions based on who I'm going to mention in this video. So, while Big Brother 24 was airing, I did this series and I've rewatched the entire series since then, so my opinion is a lot fresher. And I should have waited until after 24 was completed, but I didn't. And now I'm doing this with 26 being completed. So now I have updated information on the first 24 seasons, but now I have to add 2 new casts. So it'll be interesting to see what I have to say. I'm also going to refer to some of my old commentary based on the older seasons, though when it comes to some of them, I might just add new commentary completely. So in this video, I'm specifically talking about East Asians and Southeast Asian people, or people who are of that descent. So for example, these are people who are like Chinese, Korean, and Japanese when it comes to the East Asian. When it comes to the Southeast Asian, this is in reference to like Vietnamese people, Filipino people, Indonesian people, and I'm also going to add Pacific Islanders in this category since they are all kind of under the Mongoloid label when it came to race, and it's just easier. And the one Pacific Islander that I have here is also of Asian descent as well. And because we all know that Big Brother and CBS has the tendency to one drop, I am including people who are mixed with South Asian descent, so biracial people, though they have their different experience compared to monoracial Asian people. But with the diversity mandate that started with Big Brother 23, this is just going to become more commonplace and we're going to have a lot more people. So when it comes to the South Asians and the West Asians, I'm going to make another video for them. And I'm doing that because there's a huge difference between East and Southeast Asians, especially compared to South Asians and West Asians. They're just way too different for me to feel comfortable putting them in one category. So I'm splitting them up here. So the first person I'm going to discuss is G from Big Brother 4, and he is a Korean man. Obviously, there is this one instance where he definitely had a racist instinct or racist elements that happened to him, and I think this is the most racist instance regarding an Asian person on the show, and I'm just going to refer to my old commentary about this. So next is G from Big Brother 4, and I think out of everyone, he might have received the most overt racist treatment out of East Asians. So he literally had racist comments said about him because he nominated Erica in the second week. And since the only thing she could find to insult him was about his race and nationality, it just showed how lowly she thought of him. But she could even use his personality as an attack. So there are a lot of Asian jokes that were made to him by many of the people in the cast, especially Justin and Robert, who were his closest allies in the game. They claim that it's all good and fun, but it has not aged well at all, and there is some truth to every joke. So while they may not have meant badly, it was still a microaggression. Okay, so 2024 me is back now, and I do find G to be very interesting when it comes to this topic, because he was very proud of his Asian heritage, which is Korean in his case. He talked about his culture, tradition, and rituals throughout the season, and he did that no matter what. We saw a scene of him doing a Korean celebration of some sort or ritual regarding the anniversary of his father's death, and it even brought June together with him, since his father gave her a final wish before his death, and we really got to learn it, and we saw the house really embrace it and help him out with it, and I found that to be a really nice moment that we unfortunately don't get a lot of nowadays, and it seemed very genuine. You will notice that a lot of the Asian house guests on the show are very Americanized. This could be interpreted as them worshipping whiteness, or they didn't talk about the heritage whatsoever, or there's even some cases where their parents who migrated to the US didn't teach their kids their heritage, but that wasn't the case with G whatsoever. He stood 10 toes down regarding his Korean identity, shared it with the house guests, and still blended in socially in the house without forgetting who he is or being quote unquote race blind, which is something that I do really appreciate. Even seeing some of the conversations with himself and June and seeing some of the dynamics between the two of them, you can tell that they have a difference in their mentalities and cultural beliefs, as he's a lot less Americanized than June is. And she's very proud of his Korean heritage, and he didn't feel the need to change or to adapt it or to water it down to make other people feel comfortable. So the next person from the same season is June from Big Brother 4. I made commentary about how it is interesting to watch her and G interact with one another, even outside of the dynamic with them being exes, but just to see how two Asian people interact. And it might not be how some people would assume it to be. I do think that going into the history is important, since she mentioned that G was the only relationship that she has ever been in with an Asian man, and due to it ending, though they did it for years, she swore off of dating Asian men, and her thing is for white men now. And we do know that based on who her now ex-husband and the father of her son is. There were commentary here and there in the season about her being more Americanized compared to G, who is very strong with upkeeping his Korean tradition slash cultures slash roots. And she mentioned that she didn't want to be that type of Korean, quote unquote. And you can take that in many different ways. I wonder why one bad experience with an Asian man caused her to swear off of an entire race entirely. But could that have been a sign pertaining how she already felt about her own race and felt that whiteness was or is superior? That could open a can of worms, but I do think her being Americanized made it easier for her to maneuver in the game, especially over G. Or maybe her parents told her to be more Americanized, since that is a thing with a lot of immigrants, no matter what race or ethnicity they are. They come to the US and they tell their kids to be American and to kind of leave their culture behind. And you'll start to notice that throughout some of the people that I looked through in the video, them being quote unquote more Americanized and being more able to fit in kind of puts them, or some Asian people would put those people on a pedestal, while others would consider them sellouts or people who aren't really proud of their heritage. So I do think Jin had an interesting dichotomy there. But because she and G having the shared race, culture, and history, it made it easy for them to navigate and to understand one another's experiences wholeheartedly. But I don't think it's June being ashamed of being Asian at all. I just think that she found a way to navigate. Chronologically, and I am focusing on monoracial Asian people, at least for this part of the video, the next person is Angie from Big Brother 10. So, the fact that it took Big Brother and CBS 4 years and 5 seasons, did she know it took 5 years and 6 seasons to cast another Asian person on the show, just shows how little they cared about racial diversity pertaining the show, and that in itself is just a problem all on its own. When it actually comes to Angie herself, I don't really have much of anything to say, but I kind of just feel like that about her in general. I don't remember her really talking about her ethnicity or race throughout the show or on the feed at all, so there really isn't much to say in this regard. Though I'm pretty sure the fact that she was all on her own really didn't help her at all, where at least Ollie and Libra had one another to relate to, and everyone else was white. So, yeah. So, the next person on the list is Helen from Big Brother 15. It took us a while to get a monoracial Asian person on the show again, as I believe it took us 5 seasons and 5 years, so half a decade, to get another one. And it's rare for them to even cast someone of Asian descent in general at this point in time in Big Brother history. But we did have Helen, who is so interesting to me when it comes to this specific discussion. So Helen was a very successful woman in the political world. I think it is political, but it could have been the legal world if I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure it's political by this point in her life. And to do that as a non white person must not have been easy whatsoever. So I do give her a lot of props there. I find Helen to be a very interesting case study when it comes to this, since despite her season being over a decade old at this point in time, and by the time of Big Brother 15, the show being like 12 to 13 years old at that point in time, there really weren't many examples of people of her racial background for Helen to look up to, which is a lack of representation issue. She came in as kind of as the quote unquote modernized slash Americanized version of the Asian woman, where she's in an interracial marriage with a white man with mixed Wasian or Hapa kids. She's very into politics and seems to have adapted to America and the culture very well. And I believe she's the daughter of immigrants, if I remember correctly. And if she's not the daughter of immigrants, she herself might have been an immigrant, but I don't remember that detail for sure. Unfortunately, she was on a season with a lot of very rampant and overt racism. And it wasn't just directed towards black people, though, of course, a lot of it went towards that direction. And there were many references about Asian people and about her as well that were derogatory. Unlike Candace, who fought back against the treatment, it seemed like Helen's response was to internalize it, not mention it at all, and get in closer to some of the white racist people who are in power. And this response can be seen in so many ways. Some could see it as a response that indicates the quote unquote model minority belief, which is offensive on its own, where a lot of Asian people have discussed this problematic rhetoric where if they don't act like the quote unquote rowdy black people in this white supremacist world and dynamic, they'll be seen as better than them. Or it could also be seen as them worshipping whiteness. Or they could unite with the white people against black people and to keep the racist supremacist of whiteness dichotomy put into place. Others could also see it as Helen having to prove herself even more and to not show her weaknesses whatsoever because she knows that she would be judged harder, and being an outsider means that she has to work twice as hard to blend in and to not be what people would stereotype her as. And her being unemotional would add on to the fact that she has to be robotic and very even keeled, just so she could get in this world that was made for her to not get into. Honestly, I'm not going to lie whatsoever. Watching her during my last rewatch last year was honestly very triggering, with the gaslighting of the obvious issues of what was going on, and her kind of quote unquote weaponizing her minority status against Kenneth and Howard to justify that it wasn't that bad. Anyways, despite all of the efforts, and as we've seen not only just in real life politics, but in Big Brother as well, Helen was never really in the quote unquote in crowd, and the racist woman that she weaponized during the season and protected was the same one who booted her with the push of Amanda. I remember her years later, I believe this is around 2020, tweeting about the rampant racism on her season, and there's definitely some bitterness in her tweets, since I do remember her kind of lashing out at Spencer during this point in time. So maybe something's manifested for her years later. But there are also moments during this time, like you mentioned, it was 2020, where she was kind of defending Amanda as well, claiming that she has improved and she has apologized. And honestly, that definitely gave me the side eye. Helen is another Korean person on the show, and I tend to notice that they generally cast Korean people or Filipino people. I don't recall them casting many Japanese or Vietnamese or Chinese people on the show, so I just found it to be pretty interesting. The next person on the list is Paula from Big Brother 16, and let's give a round of applause. It took them one season to cast another monoracially Asian person, so they're improving, and I think that's the first time they did that. Anyways, when it comes to Paola, there really isn't much to say about her in general, mainly because she was in the house for 2 weeks. In addition to that, she really wasn't involved in any other dynamics in the house. I was completely out of the loop, in addition to being nominated literally the entire time she was in the house. At the same time, do I think that it was a coincidence that the women and the non white people were the ones who were consistently getting nominated and evicted for the first half of the season? No, it was not a coincidence, in my opinion, and she fit both categories, so she was in a double disadvantage. So, really, she didn't really have much of a chance, anyways. Alrighty, so the next person on this list is James from Big Brother 17 and Big Brother 18. I literally recorded a decent amount of this video before I realized, oh crap, I forgot James, so I'm adding him in here. James is a very unique case because he was adopted by a white couple, and I believe he's Korean. I'm not too sure about that, but he is a monoracial Asian man who was adopted by a white family in a small Texas town. So, one, he stands out because he isn't white. Two, he stands out even more because his parents are white via adoption. Three, there's obviously going to be a lot of cultural clashes there because he's growing up in a more white culture based off of his adopted family, and his adopted family not really understanding his identity because they are white and he is not. And I don't know if he knew a lot about his racial culture or his culture based off of his nationality or ethnicity. I don't know about that, but usually with people in these situations, when it comes to these interracial adoptions, they usually don't know much about their racial identity, culture, ethnic culture, and all the baggage there, especially if they're adopted by white families. So he comes into Big Brother 17 with being one of the two non white people on the cast, and he's the only Asian person on the cast. So obviously, that was a huge struggle there. And the other non white person was booted pretty much immediately. So James essentially had to work with an all-white cast throughout the entire season. I don't know if him being adopted by white people helped him navigate a bit more in comparison to other monoracial Asian people that we've seen on the show before and after him. On 18, there was definitely more diversity. I believe Bridget was there and she's half Asian. I don't know if they had a bond over that, but I do think it was kind of easier for him to manage because there are so many other different groups of people. It wasn't just an entirely white cast, but him being a veteran also helped with that. So, in some ways, he could kind of relate to the biracial people when it comes to different cultures and stuff like that. But it's different because he was adopted into this family. He himself isn't white, and he has no attachment to his culture because his parents giving him up for adoption. So I kind of found that to be very interesting. A part of me is wondering if that's why he came off as so unthreatening in his 2 seasons, because he knew he was so different from most of the people that he was around. And in order for them to feel comfortable with him and to not feel intimidated by him, he was very chill, he was very keen, he was very unthreatening, and all that jazz. At the same time, I do think a large part of it's just his personality, where he really isn't a strategic person. He is not someone who is intimidating, though a large part of that had to do with his size. And I also think people hearing his country accent definitely throws a lot of people off and kind of makes him seem as unintimidating or someone who can blend in easier because he has an American accent and a Southern accent at that. So I found that to be very interesting too. So the next person in discussion is Alex from Big Brother 19. So by this point in Big Brother, they're starting to be a lot more consistent when it comes to casting either Asian people or people of Asian descent. So there's some progress happening here, though it's pretty slow. I don't remember what her nationality or ethnicity is, to be honest, but I do recall her being monoracial. There was one incident that comes to mind when it comes to her experience on the show, and it happened right at the beginning of the season. Jessica was talking trash about Alex, and I believe she was talking to Cody, and she called Alex Pow Pow. which is after Paola. And Jessica did this several times throughout the first few weeks of the season, even though she knew Alex's name. And due to the fact that she knew Alex's name, she was intentionally doing this to be very shady and rude. Megan thought that Megan thought that Jessica called Alex Panda, and using the panda term as a negative derogatory term towards an Asian woman, where pandas are mainly present in East and Southeast Asia. And obviously, that is a problem with the rhetoric. Outside of that situation, which Megan definitely misinterpreted, though it was still pretty problematic, nothing really came up to my recollection. But there are some elements to not only compare her to another Asian woman who also had blonde hair, but to continuously call her that after knowing it's not the case, as a means to disrespect her, is problematic and is a racial lens that Jessica either didn't know or understand or didn't care to know or understand, and that's a problem within itself. Just from my recollection, Alex definitely did see someone who was kind of Americanized, but she wasn't such in the way that a Helen or a June or even an Isabella was. So she was different compared to some of the others. And what makes it even worse is that Alex and Paola's personalities were completely different. So you're comparing them due to very superficial, shallow, and honestly just disrespectful reasons. So the next person on my list is Isabella from Big Brother 21. So I didn't know what her ethnicity or her racial background. Sorry, I didn't know the nationality of her racial or ethnic background was, but then I looked up the etymology of her last name, which is Wang. So I'm assuming that she is Chinese, since Wang is a Chinese last name. So, anyways, I feel like her trajectory on the show is very similar to Helen's trajectory on Big Brother 15, though there are some differences that stand out, due to Isabella being a lot younger, not established career wise, and not a parent, in addition to just her being an awful player in comparison. In her intro, there was talk about her being a first generation born Asian American in her family, and she kind of has different sides to her, pertaining being more traditional with her family and being a lot more Americanized when she's outside of the house. So I think elements of that showed up in her personality and how she played in the season. When it comes to all the other stuff, I'm just going to refer to my old commentary, which will be after this. Oh gosh, I can't believe I almost forgot to talk about Isabella, especially since there's quite a bit to talk about with her. She was initially brought into the Majority Alliance, but was also aligned with some of the outsider women like Kemi, Nicole, and Jessica. Of course, Bella threw them all under the bus to her Majority Alliance, but this Majority Alliance didn't really trust Bella either. Since she and Kemi were initially close, they ended up falling out due to Bella's messy gameplay and her complicitness in the racist comments and the microaggressions that Kemi was going through in the house, while adding her few commentary here and there as well, especially as they argued in front of everyone. Bella was one of the minorities who tried to appease the White House guests the best that she could, but despite all of that, none of them trusted her, and they all wanted her out as soon as possible. It was not a coincidence to me that she was booted right after Camp Comeback ended, where all the other racial minorities were essentially booted already. And despite being the least threatening person out of herself, Nick, and Sam, she was the one that was booted first. And of course, once it was her time to go, the cast started unleashing their microaggressions against her, so she wasn't exempt from having that same treatment that the other people of color received in the season. And it also showed that Asian Houseguests are not exempt from having microaggressions thrown at them, which she definitely had to deal with. And from how she reacted post her eviction up to the present day, she doesn't really mess with anyone from the cast, and it wasn't an enjoyable experience for her. Alrighty, so the next person and the first person cast in the diversity era of Big Brother that's A part of this group is Derek from Big Brother 23. So just from looking up his last name, which is Xiao, hopefully I said that correctly, it is a Chinese surname, so I'm under the assumption that he is Chinese. So he's definitely one of the many who was more Americanized. He talked about being a first generation Asian person from his family, and he had different values and saw things differently compared to his parents, and we definitely saw that here. I also remember him talking about his preference for white women a lot throughout the season, which I found to be pretty interesting. Um, Anyways, I think it's been a very long time since they cast a monoracial Asian man on the show, and it says a lot since the show has been on for about 2 decades up until this point. In general, I'm just going to refer to my old commentary when it comes to him. And the last person in the East Asian group is Derek from Big Brother 23. He did mention wanting to do the show for representation and that there was an alliance of all black people that were formed in the season for the same reason. But unfortunately for him, there was no other East Asian person in the house. And while there was another Asian person, she was kind of grouped into with the black people due to their similar goals, so he was kind of left on his own. Many of the fans complained about the cookouts not making it into a person of color alliance to include him as well as Alyssa, and people felt like him not being white or black directly hurt his game. It is ironic due to all the mess that is happening on this season. There was also the moment where Whitney made a racist comment about Asian people having small private parts and referred it to him. Of course, this is a huge stereotype that is given towards Asian men to desexualize them and to make them seem less masculine. So he had to deal with that in the season while he wasn't aware of it happening. Chronologically, the next person on the list is Blue from Big Brother 25, and she's the first person that I'm talking about in this category that was not on the last video, since obviously Big Brother 25 happened after I posted the last video. So when it comes to Asian women on the show, definitely more Americanized, and I believe she's a first generation Korean, but I didn't get that feeling that she was obsessed with whiteness or trying to blend in with white people or suppressing herself. She had her own interests that were not common amongst Koreans, but she was also proud to be Korean and had elements of her culture slash race in her aesthetic and personality as well. And if you look at her social media currently, you can definitely tell that has remained consistent. I remember some people accusing her of trying to talk in a black accent, especially in the diary room, since it tends to be the thing with people on social media or a lot of social media influencers tend to do, since they see quote unquote black accenting and black slang quote unquote as an American slash Western thing. But she was only like that in the diary room, which just made it so much more performative and annoying. But she acted like herself when she was in the house and just speaking to the other house guests, and she didn't talk in a different or exaggerated voice. While I am sure that a part of this came from the fact that she is a content creator who can be very put on and performative, it was also kind of saddening to watch as well. But I definitely do find her interesting in regards to this conversation. Though she and Jack definitely had some sort of bond due to them being Asian, but Jag is South Asian and she is East Asian, and genetically they're really not much alike at all. And she never really used her identity politics to align with people at all. So we are finally at the current season of Big Brother, which is Big Brother 26, and the first person that I am discussing is Chemo. So yes, I am including Pacific Islanders on this video since one, there's way too little of them for me to have them on their own video, and two, they are genetically very close to East and Southeast Asians and generally have the same phenotype. And Kimo's also part Japanese, so it just makes sense for me to put him here. I remember in his preseason interviews, whenever a question was asked to him, especially about his gameplay, he just kind of just referred to it and always redirected the question to it being about him being gay and the first native Hawaiian. And he kept on doing that over and over and over again. So, in my opinion, it had me thinking that he is going to kind of use that as a strategy. One, he does strongly identify with it clearly, and that's a very good thing, and it makes him very unique. And it actually added to his winning potential once he got to the end of the game, as it gave him a very linear story, and people wanted that representation. And based on who he was aligned with in T-Core, who is someone who is very into identity politics and is very liberal and it's all about the people of color, and Rubina, who is a Filipino woman. And the fact that he and Rubina being on a season together and then being aligned is something that is so rare pertaining people of Asian descent overall, and we haven't really seen that on Big Brother. I think the only case where we saw that on was in Big Brother 4, and obviously that is such a circumstantial situation due to the X Factor twist, where here it was a lot more natural. So they formed a very tight duo, and with T-Core, they formed a very tight trio, and they kept on talking about wanting people of color to win, wanting women to win, and they kept on using identity politics for a lot of their gameplay. Though I felt like Kimo cared about it to the least, especially once he got a lot closer to Tucker, a white man that he had a crush on, where it was mainly Rubina and T-Core who kept on pushing all of that. And after Tucker left, Kimo didn't really have much motivation. But when Kimo was lined up to go home against Joseph, he just mentioned in his speech how he really wants to be here because he's a gay man and he's a native Hawaiian man. He was able to flip a few votes and it caused him to stay. So I find this ironic because literally, whenever he kept on mentioning his racial identity and his sexuality pertaining questions about his gameplay in the preseason, he literally did that in the seventh week. So yeah, he literally used his identity for strategy. And in general, I really don't have anything else to say about him. So chronologically, the final monoracial person that I am going to be discussing here is Rubina, as she is Filipino. And to be honest, I think she's the first monoracial Filipino woman on the show, and that says so much. But we'll get to the other elements of that when we get to it. And even she wasn't the only person of Filipino descent to be on the show, where obviously Matt, who is half Filipino, was on the same season, and they had that moment in the first day. But she never really used that towards her advantage, and I think the fact that she kind of lets that go kind of just showed her lack of knowledge of the game, where it really wasn't until T-Core kind of showed her the way and how you bond with people who you have similar identities with and use that for gameplay, is why she kind of started picking that up. And due to Rubina already being close to Chemo, I think she realized, okay, the two of us really, 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 really need to stick together. And I already talked about how the three of them always kind of talked about identity politics and kind of used that towards their strategy. They talked about who they wanted to be represented at the end and all of that jazz. The thing with T Core is that she was very open about how she wanted to work with Chelsea because they are two black women. She can't do this to Cedric. She can't do this to Cam. Blah, 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 blah. And Rubina kind of got envious of T-Core's positionality in the house due to her connecting with the other black people or the people with black descent. And I felt like Rubina could have had that herself since this was the first season where there was a lot more than one or two people that was of Asian descent, but she kind of just let that go. And I think once she got with Tucker, she really kind of just stopped focusing on a lot of that. And it wasn't until after Tucker left where, yet again, she and Tikora was talking about feminism, 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 feminism. So to me, it kind of just felt like she was kind of just like weaponizing her identity at certain points in times throughout the season. And I also think that Rubina just being very passive as a game player kind of let it caused her to let a lot of these opportunities just go by. And then she got envious when she saw other people doing what in reality she should have done. Now, I do have to talk about her showmance with Tucker and the racial elements towards it. I found it kind of interesting that Leah and to a lesser extent Mackenzie, they were crushing hardcore on Tucker, and they were mad that he wasn't giving them the attention that they felt like he should have been given to them. And I noticed once he officially went public with Rubina, they kind of got very jealous and they felt very entitled. And I'm wondering if a part of that entitlement was due to the fact that Rubina was a quote unquote older, she was really only 35, but they're in their 20s, brown skinned, shorter, monoracially Asian, non white woman, since there tends to be this ideology with a lot of white women where they feel like they should be the preference for any man that they like, especially if that person is a white man. And I noticed that a lot of the fan base at this time started throwing a lot more vitriol at her due to her getting with Tucker, and a lot of them were Leah and Mackenzie stands, and they threw a lot of racism her way in this regard. So that's definitely an element that I have to call out. I don't think Tucker is surprised, so don't make it seem like I'm making this point in that regard. But it's just another example of when a non white woman gets the desirability that a white woman or a group of white people feel like they should have, and them throwing their isms against that non white person due to it. So I found that to be an interesting element regarding Rubina's journey on the season. Now I'm going to talk about people who are mixed race or mixed with Asian and are of Asian descent. So these are people who are either half Asian, half white, half Asian, half black, etc. And the first person on the list is Kevin from Big Brother 11 and Big Brother 22. I just first want to mention that I made a video discussing the types of mixed people and how then people who aren't mixed with the white tend to kind of be more invisible and kind of pushed to the bottom compared to the others who are mixed with white. And just by looking at the people who are mixed with Asian on Big Brother, you definitely see that, as Kevin is the only Blasian person to ever be cast on Big Brother, and that is someone who was half black and half Asian. I'm going to play my own commentary regarding him, and I might add some new commentary afterwards. I know he was in the video that I discussed black men under, but if a house guest is a double minority, they're going to be in both videos. So that's just a reference for future videos. So, anyways, he had racist comments thrown towards him, but they were comments that didn't even pertain to his own race or ethnicity. The whole situation with Brayden and Lydia. And he saw how some of the other house guests reacted to it and how nonchalant some of them reacted to it, which pissed him off, essentially. And he still holds some resentment towards it. He was immediately placed on the out on both seasons he partook in, and I don't know if that was pertaining to his sexuality, his race or ethnicity, a combination of them, or other factors. There was a lot of discussion about race in Big Brother All Stars 2, and he was told by Devon that he wasn't black enough, or wasn't black because he's half Japanese, which he did take offense to. It was the same dichotomy that a lot of biracial people, not even just house guests, deal with on a daily basis where they feel like they don't belong in either group. So this is 2024 Lala coming in, and I think the thing with Kevin is that he looks very racially ambiguous. He doesn't really look black, but he doesn't really look like what people would assume to be Asian either. And I think being racially ambiguous adds another dichotomy and a level when it comes to racial identity and phenotype. His racial ambiguity caused for him to be called slurs against mestizo Mexican people on Big Brother 11. And I think he also kind of talked about how his racial ambiguity made it even harder for him to blend in with either group. Because if you tend to either look more black, you'll be lumped in with black people, and if you tend to look more Asian, you'll be lumped in with Asian people. And I also think he suffers because his biracial identity doesn't center around whiteness. And due to that, Blasians are made a lot more invisible when it comes to the media and just in general. There's this awful dichotomy where people just assume biracial to mean half white, and that's not necessarily the case. So I think Kevin's very unique in this regard. Chronologically, the next person on the list is Dominic from Big Brother 13. So we're moving on from a Blasian to a Wasian, or a Hapa, whatever term you prefer. And there are a lot more biracial people mixed with white and Asian on the show than people who are mixed with black and Asian. Regarding Dominic himself, I don't recall him ever really bringing up his racial background on the show or the feed, from what I remember. It doesn't mean he didn't do it, I just don't have any recollection of it. I personally don't think it really had any effect on his experience during Big Brother, so I don't really have much to say about him. What I do remember is Danielle bringing up on All Stars that their daughter is Asian, so I found that to be very interesting. Despite their child being a fourth Asian and essentially white. So just from that, maybe Dominic does identify with being Asian and or Filipino more. I don't know. I just don't have that context. But that little tidbit states that maybe he does identify more with his Filipino side. So on social media in general, I see a lot of debate regarding biracial people with those that have a white mother or a non-white mother regarding biracial people, and to see if there are certain differences pertaining their mentality, pathology, their cultural identity or the cultural habits, their ethnic and racial identity, so on and so forth. And from what I remember watching his intro on the season, his mother is white, so maybe it explained why he didn't mention it that much. So he is half Filipino, so that is his tie to Asianness, if that makes sense. The next person in discussion is Bridget from Big Brother 18. So she is the first Wasian slash Hapa female Houseguest, and at first I thought that her racial makeup really didn't play much an effect on the season. I thought initially that she had white passing privilege, or she appeared to be white passing. This was my initial thoughts of it. And while she definitely did talk about her Filipino heritage, she didn't talk about it nearly as much as some of the others before and after her. I will say though that she ended up being isolated and alone after the first few weeks of the season, and a lot of the women did not like her at all. It wasn't until there were a few comments that came from Zakia about Bridget's quote unquote chinking eyes and making the eye marks with her fingers a few times, where I realized that her racial makeup was definitely some sort of factor regarding her experience on the show. No one really checked these comments, and they were all made behind her back, and Zakia was clearly saying this in a more negative way, and there's nothing neutral or positive about those terms. I did notice that the Latino houseguests had some sort of camaraderie throughout the season, and so did the Black houseguests, so she didn't really have someone to relate to, despite James being another Asian person on the season. But I already kind of mentioned how him being adopted might have played into an effect regarding certain things. So sometimes you definitely have to look under the surface to find out there's definitely some elements that race definitely does come into play. And what I find interesting about Big Brother 18 is that it's arguably the most racially diverse cast when it comes to the pre-diversity era. So on paper, Bridget should have found people to relate to in this regard, but she didn't really have that experience. So the next person in discussion is Casey from Big Brother 20. I don't have much to say about Casey, but I don't have much to say about her in general. So her racial makeup is the fact that she is half Filipino and half white, and she never really talked about it much on the show or on the feed, from my recollection. During the season, she aligned with the people that was filled with, or she aligned with the side that was filled with white people instead of the more colorful side of the house. But that could have been a coincidence, though I did find it interesting to notice that when I am talking about race in a season. And I don't think I mentioned that part in my last video. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Whatever. Like I said earlier, she didn't really talk about that much, but I did find it interesting that despite her aligning with the White Houseguest of the season, she is promoted as an Asian houseguest and an Asian winner solely. It is the tendency of CPS and in general for people to one drop biracial people into their non-white half, even if that person does not identify like that, or they are equally defined and close to both sides. We don't really know the case with Casey. No one calls her a white winner, despite her having a white last name, clearly coming from her white father, and a white parent, so I always found that interesting. And this continued on with the challenge, as her solely being identified as Asian. despite her being half white. I also noticed that there are quite a few half Filipino and half white people on the show, and most of the Wasian people that are cast tend to fit that. So that's just something that I found to be pretty coincidental. Okay, so I forgot to mention that Steve from the same season is half Pacific Islander and half white Italian, but I don't really have much to say about him in general, and it's clearly something that he didn't really discuss much with anyone, so there's very little commonality there. So, the second to last person that I will be discussing in this video is Nicole from Big Brother 24. I don't have much to discuss about her in general, but she is half Filipino and half Puerto Rican. Obviously, saying you're half Puerto Rican really doesn't mean much racially, but most Puerto Ricans are overwhelmingly white, so she is probably under the Wasian category. Anyways, she is one of the few mixed people of Asian descent who did talk about both sides pretty equally from what I remember regarding her short time on Big Brother 24, so I do give her credit for that. But also, she was in the era of Big Brother where that was probably more welcome, since she was cast in the diversity era of Big Brother USA. But even with that, when I look at her downfall, especially in hindsight, regarding who was responsible for her downfall, mainly Kyle, with Monty kind of supporting it. I do think a part of her downfall came from Kyle not feeling comfortable working with a bunch of colored women who are A-type personalities and who weren't going to back down, as it scared him. But he was more than fine working with white people who had similar personalities, and he always came up with a bunch of reasons to distrust colored people. So I do think, in hindsight, that played a part in her downfall, but people didn't realize that until Kyle showed his ass with the Leftovers Alliance, which is what he created to turn on her for earlier on in the season. And the final person that I will be discussing in this video is Matt from Big Brother 26. What I found interesting about him is that he lasted 1 week, but I have so much more to say about him as a Wasian/Hapa person than I do about others that lasted longer than him on the show, where due to their racial identity either not being important in their lives or they wanted to blend in. So mentioning their mixed heritage made them stand out too much. I also think a part of it came from the fact that he was clearly cast on the diversity era, where talking about your racial mixture and the diversity was heavily recommended, and it was one of the main reasons why they got cast. Literally from the very beginning, like in their intros, he mentioned being Filipino 100 times, and I don't know if a part of this was him trying to overcompensate on that element, because I don't know if people are saying he's not Filipino enough. But he does have a Filipino mother who he brings up quite a few times on the show, where I think some of the others, mainly Dominic, has a white mother. So the culture could have been passed differently between the two of them, where he identifies a lot more with being Filipino because of his mother. And like I mentioned earlier, there's that dichotomy between the type of parent regarding whether you have a white mother or an Asian mother or whatever else. Maybe that was an element of it. There was the whole crazy eyes moment that happened with Angela, and while I don't think Angela was being racist with that term, as he does have big, expressive bug eyes, and I say this as someone who also has big bug eyes, saying that to a person with Asian descent was always going to be controversial at best, and will probably be best to avoid it, but I guess she didn't have that nuance. But literally in the house and even outside of the house, he never even saw it in that lens. So he clearly wasn't offended on it in that level. But she kind of insulted his mother, which caused a huge meltdown, and he was bothered about that. So yeah. I also wanted to mention that Big Brother 26 was the one season where they had several people of East and Southeast Asian descent. So that was very rare. But they didn't really take this into their advantage, like I mentioned with Rubina and Chemo on the season. So yeah. And just looking through this list, they really did a poor job for most of Big Brother's history. When even like casting monoracial and biracial Asian people, they just didn't do a good job. There's many points where there was like several seasons where there was no representative, or they'd cast one like every 3 to 4 seasons. It'd be rare for there to be more than one of them, and it wasn't until recently where they started to do a bit better and they were more consistent with casting people of East or Southeast Asian descent. And Big Brother 23 being the first one that had more than 2 really just says a lot. I did find it interesting with some of them becoming more Americanized and them seeing Americanization as blending in to the point where they kind of like ignored their racial background or ethnicity, but I also just think it's due to Asian Americans not being as established compared to Black Americans in the US when it comes to the racial dynamics, and them really having a lot of their own communities and visibility in the media. So I definitely do think that played a part into things. And I think in general, they're just a lot more quiet in comparison. And I think that's why Big Brother felt like they could get away with not casting them for several seasons at a point in time. And obviously, even with the diversity era, they thought that they could get away with not casting as many Asian people, which is why the likes of Big Brother 23, 24, and 25 were the way they were. And ultimately, they heard people's complaints with Big Brother 26, which I was proud of. So I'm definitely going to be making the Black or people of Black descent Houseguests at some point. That's going to be the longest, I already know, and I'll probably do that last. I think I'm going to be talking about the West and South Asian people next. That will be an interesting video, and there's a lot less of them, so it shouldn't take too long. But anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content soon. Take care!